Okay, scholars, we've been talking about some of the different components of culture. We talked about language. We talked about norms. We're going to continue our discussion of norms. We started out talking about formal and informal norms, and then we divided it out even further into mores, folkways. I didn't mention taboos. Taboos are rules that are so rigid that to break them under any circumstances tends to be to result in a societal reaction and judgment. Okay, so even though we have a moray against taking other people's lives, the laws that we have against homicide, there are certain situations in which an individual who takes another person's life might be excused for that, justifiable homicide and self-defense or to protect family members. But when we talk about a taboo, there really aren't any circumstances where we would not have some kind of reaction to someone who violates a taboo. And a taboo might be something like engaging in cannibalism or incest, things of that nature. Okay, so we know that, pardon me, we know that people don't always play by the rules. Even though we have these norms, sometimes people violate norms. We know that sometimes norms aren't really strongly enforced. If we think about the speed limit, most people believe that they can drive 5 or 6 or even more miles per hour over the speed limit and avoid getting caught. And even if they are seen by police officers, that a lot of times that will be ignored. So, lax enforcement of speed limit laws can result in people breaking those laws. Also, we know that a behavior can conform to a group norm, but it may not conform to a societal norm. So what we mean here is that teenagers may understand that it's against the law for them to be out past curfew and to use drugs and drink underage, but being part of their subculture encourages them to break some of those rules. And so we are encouraged in certain cases to break the rules that society has by some members of our subcultures. Okay, we also know that norms can sometimes be violated because they conflict with other norms. So, for example, if someone is sworn to secrecy, and so you're not supposed to tell a secret, but you're fearful that your friend is going to hurt themselves. That's the secret they share with you. You might be in a situation where you feel like you have to violate that norm of keeping your friend's secret because you want to keep them alive. Okay. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of allergy problems today. So, a sudden change in society can create lots of problems and make it more difficult for people to play by the rules and to live up to the norms. For example, when we saw what happened with Hurricane Katrina down in New Orleans, it was a period of lawlessness, and so the damage to social structure, to society's social structure, freed people up to break rules that normally they would have lived up to. Okay. And we can also talk about how norms change over time. We know that our norms regarding interracial marriage have changed. Today, it's certainly legal and becoming more acceptable. We see that there has been an increase in the number of interracial marriages, but still it's less than 20% of the overall marriages. So even though the laws have changed and norms have changed, and it is somewhat more acceptable, it's still not the dominant pattern. We still see more marriages occurring within racial categories. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about values. Values are defined as the collective conceptions of what is good, desirable, and proper, or bad, undesirable, and improper in a culture. Uh, We have some indications of what people in a culture prefer, find important, find morally right or wrong. And so values are things that people hold dear to their hearts. Here in the United States, I would say that we certainly value upward mobility. We value the American flag and the freedoms that it represents. We've asked incoming freshmen what kinds of values they have for many years, many decades now, and we have found that the values that people adhere to have changed. There was a time when developing a meaningful philosophy of life was a goal that people had when they went to college. Back in the 50s and 60s, but today that is a very it's undervalued today. I guess you could say people are much less likely to say that they value developing a meaningful philosophy of life when they go to college. They tend to value being financially successful more today. So there's been a real increase in the value that we place in that, and a real decline in the value that we place on that meaningful philosophy of life. Okay. Values can either be very specific or more general, and we see that values, norms, and sanctions are often related to each other. Um, and so, you can tell a lot about a culture by the things that it values. So if you look at that figure 3.3-2 in your textbook, you will see that they discuss the life goals of first-year college students in the U.S. from 1996 to 2016. We used to have data going back even further than that, but we can see that and this does actually go back further. I don't know why that says 1996 to 2016, because we actually have data going back to 1965 if you look at that table. And developing a meaningful philosophy of life in 1966 or so, looks like over 80% of American freshmen thought that was a worthy goal for their college experience, but we see that today that's somewhere around probably a little less than 50% of college students think that that's important. And so if you look at that chart, it'll tell you something about how our values have changed for college students who are entering college. Okay.